Hey, what's up?
What's up?
You're a worm, Harry,
Oh, what
or a hairy worm.
makes me think of that worm on Labyrinth. Come inside and meet the missus.
Oh, just a worm. All right, so I was asking you about the dragon and this weird horns dragon, and you had some interesting stuff to say, so just do it. What is
Well, in the southeastern Native American various traditions, they have this figure that the Ojibwa call him Mishapeshu. We talked about him a little bit, I think, the last time we talked. He's two things. He's called the Great Serpent, and when he's called that, he's depicted with feathered wings, which led a lot of scholars, archaeologists to interpret him in terms of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent of Central America. But that's wrong. There might be a historical connection, but they mean totally different things.
Yeah, I was looking into this because it was fascinating what you were telling me, and like there are references. The oldest references to dragons look something like for instance, the Thunderbird is possibly considered a dragon type figure, but before dragons were really iconic, it was a native thing, very primitive.
Mm-hmm. In southeastern Native American traditions, the Thunderbirds are opposed to the serpent figure. They're like enemies. And the Thunderbirds represent, in one sense, the four winds, the four quarters. But the serpent, there are two manifestations of him. One with these wings. And the reason he's shown with wings is because for half of the year, he exists in the sky. And then for the other half, he exists in the below world because he rules the underworld. So in this conception of the cosmos, the night sky is literally the underworld that gets flipped over.
I was about to ask you because the guardian of the astral, once you use the dream machines to clear your mind, you don't have any iconography for it to bring up and use your subconsciousness against you. But if you were scared of something like a dragon, that's what it would appear to be, coming at you, eating you, breathing fire, because they turn
That's
in.
the most common thing that shows up on ayahuasca, psilocybin. Not necessarily a dragon, but a giant serpent. That kind of thing. And that's what he is. So when he's got those wings, it's because that's what he looks like during the summer, because they identify him with the constellation of Scorpio. So what modern Westerners recognize as Scorpio, they saw as the constellation of the Great Serpent, this horned serpent. And he doesn't have wings, but they put wings on him as what's called a locative to indicate that he's in the sky. Now, in the winter months, Scorpio never comes above the horizon at night. So you never see Scorpio all winter. You only see him during the summer. And this serpent guards the land of the dead, and he keeps people from entering what's called the path of souls. So if you're trying to get on the path of souls and go to the land of the dead and you don't belong there, he will snatch you out of the sky and throw you into the underworld where you get stuck. So
I think I've met this entity, and
you may have.
It was the only thing after my source experience, besides the audience, that truly scared the shit out of me. It was something else, man.
Well, in the winter months, he goes into the underworld like a bear hibernating, and he doesn't come back out. And when that happens, he loses his wings. He's no longer depicted with wings, and he becomes what's called the underwater panther. So he's like kind of like an otter, like a giant otter with a long tail, but he looks like a cat, and he lives underwater. And he's Native Americans back during the Mississippian period were absolutely terrified of this thing. And it could come out of any water. It didn't have to be the ocean. It could be a pond, a river. It could be a puddle from the rain, because that puddle becomes a mirror, sort of, and that mirror is an entry into the underworld, just like an Alice in Wonderland or something. So he's an entity. But the Algonquians back in the 70s, this folklorist named George Langford, really brilliant guy. Unfortunately, he's got severe dementia now, and he's in a home in Alabama, I think. But he was talking to different native groups and getting them to tell him about this serpent and different beings in their cosmology. And one thing that the Algonquian speaking people, like the Shawnee and the Micmac, they told him that it's green with a red horn and is no bigger than the size of a worm. So even though he's the great serpent, this group, the Algonquian people, are saying he's the size of a worm. Now,
it reminds me that that's so similar to about the size of a mustard seed or something like that. And
yeah,
we always assumed they must have been talking about possibly a spore and the mushroom experience, and connected that with mana, and it actually, the golden calf, and it fits a lot of the motif.
Yeah, or a mushroom pin. The pins look like they're about the size of a mustard seed when they first pop up. But so this great serpent, looked at as this thing that's no bigger than a worm, it's meaningless until you compare it to this other supernatural entity in these southeastern cosmologies, which is this giant moth. And the giant moth appears on different has an icon on different vessels, pallets, carved onto these things, etched into them, as artwork. And nobody knew what the thing was.
Fascinating. The Mothman was always, if I got my facts right, the Mothman was usually seen around the fall and winter months.
The Mothman comes from this myth. I don't know if you remember at the beginning of the book, but the Mothman came about from a curse put on those people by a Native American. They're specifically talking about these southeastern Native Americans that believed in this Mothman entity. So this moth, at first they didn't even know it was a moth. If you look at something called the Willoughby disc, you can see it to the left, but it's abstract looking, it's surreal looking. They stylized it, and nobody knew what this was until this archaeologist named F. Kent Riley started holding a convention at Texas State University every year with different specialists and Native Americans. So they're looking at this image, and the archaeologists are all scratching their head like, what the hell is that? And the Native Americans are like, oh, we know what that is. We still draw that thing. We still paint that thing. We still put that thing in our textiles. And they're like, well, what is it? And they say it's a tobacco moth. And sure enough, they start comparing them, and it's a moth. Now, the tobacco moth is a species called Manduca sexta, and it only lays its eggs upon tobacco and datura. Once the larva, the caterpillar, comes out, it's called a tobacco hornworm. There's another variation called a tomato hornworm that looks very similar, but it's a completely different species. This one, they lay their eggs on the tobacco and on the datura because the larva will only eat tobacco and datura. And nicotine and tropane alkaloids are toxic to all insects and animals, except for this guy. He's got a protein in his body called CYP6B46 that is able to not only make him immune to the toxin, but he can hold it in his body indefinitely and eject it out of his mouth at will as a defense mechanism. And so
it's psychoactive, right?
Yeah, and it's psychoactive. And there are even stories about youths. They're like myths, but we think that they were used as what's called a charter for for actual rituals that were done for rites of passage for young boys. But these stories talk about the boys. They're being instructed by someone. This man says, "You see that worm right there? Well, he pukes, he spits, and he says, I want you to take those worms and put them in your mouth. Don't chew them, just hold them there." And then he says, "And spit out the juice like you spit out tobacco juice." So they're getting.
I looked this up. So if you chew it, it will. And this is by my super prompt on Chat GPT. I had to get it to speculate as to what might happen. So its first line of defense is known to be the spit. It's called tobacco spit, but like you're saying, it's more like a chemical defense that actually has psychoactive and harmful odors and things. It's meant.
Yeah, they can even breathe it out in a gas.
Yeah, it's the first line of deterrent. The second line of deterrent is thrashing with that little horn. So if they had put it in their mouths and chewed as not instructed, it would hurt. It would really hurt.
And they've only got the one horn. And remember, the story says they're green with one horn and they're the size of a worm. So this thing eventually becomes a pupa and turns into this moth. And this moth in South America, as far as South America, he's referred to as the mother of tobacco because the connection is so close and they're so aware of it. So this tradition isn't just limited to North America. There are drawings and images of this moth in Central America and Mayan and Aztec iconography. So it seems to be widespread throughout the Americas. But like I said, they're connected. The moth is the worm, and
it's very archetypal. When I first started doing art on Midjourney, the Mothman was the first thing I did. I still have some of those pictures. I don't know why.
Well, go back and watch
right
the movie of the Mothman and think about this thing, because that's what it's talking about. The archaeologists give him two names. They call him Mothman and they call him Mothra. Mothra comes from this figure from what's the Godzilla. He's in the Godzilla episode where he fights the giant moth. You can look it up on YouTube. It's hilarious. But they named him after that because we don't know what the actual name.
You remember Arthur from the Tick cartoon?
Oh yeah,
he was the Mothman. That was his.
I'd forgotten about that show altogether. Well, that's him, and like I said, this moth appears on vessels from different Native American groups. One vessel they found in Moundville, Alabama, and it eventually ended up in the Gilcrease Museum in Oklahoma. And a group of scholars got together and decided, why they didn't do this before, I don't know, but they decided to test the residues in these pots to find out what they held. And this particular pot had the residues of tropane alkaloids, which comes from datura. So we don't know if they were drinking datura out of that pot. You got to think they don't have a written language. So how do you put a label on a pot to indicate what it contains if you don't have a language? Well, you make the pot
a worm or something.
You make it as an effigy of the thing it contains, or you paint the thing it contains on it. And that's what they did. And in this particular one, it's got a spiral on the front of it. And this spiral shows up. It's like it's a jagged spiral. On one side of it has teeth, and it shows up on lots of different icons. Now they know that's this moth's proboscis, which he uncoils to feed on datura and tobacco flowers, because that's all he eats. Once he becomes a moth, he still only eats the nectar from those flowers, and he's the only pollinator for tobacco and for
fascinating, man.
datura.
I don't know if I would have put that together. That's fascinating.
Yeah, it is really fascinating. And it just shows how ingenious they were in regard to their ability to communicate this stuff and how advanced they were in terms of drugs and pharmacopoeia. I mean, when they did these analyses of botanical assemblages that were recovered from various mound sites, and they kept finding tobacco, datura, black nightshade, passion flower, which is an MAOI that renders DMT active, St. John's wort, vervain, opium lettuce, which is a wild lettuce called what's the name? Verosa, Lactuca verosa.
Yeah, I've never heard of opium lettuce. What is that?
It's a wild lettuce that contains a compound in it that, according to botanists, the compound is as effective as morphine. It's a painkiller. I don't know if you remember when we were kids, when we'd smoke joints, and we had this friend that had this black gunky shit that he would paint on the joint. Remember, we got it on our lips and it would make our lips go numb.
Yeah, it's like a dream, man. It was so long ago.
Well, he got it at a head shop where they sold it as opium lettuce. And that was the first time I'd ever heard those two words put together. But once I got older and I started foraging local plants and food and medicines, I found out that opium lettuce is a real thing and it grows all over the place. I make tinctures from it, but that's what they're using. It's a painkiller. So they even had a form of ayahuasca. Now, this isn't written anywhere. This is what's going to be one of the main focuses of this book I'm about to publish on this topic. But they had a form of ayahuasca where they were boiling the roots of a tree called Gleditsia triacanthos. Remember the tree at Steve's house down in Senatobia that had those massive thorns, like 10-inch thorns sticking out of it, that fell down right there by the birdhouse?
Oh yeah,
That
fell
was
down.
Yeah, it fell down. That was one of those trees, Gleditsia triacanthos. It was previously classified as Acacia americana. And anyone who's familiar with my previous two books knows that acacia is one of the main sources of DMT. It exists in the roots. Well, all I knew was that there are different botanists and archaeologists know that they were planting these trees all over the mounds. Every mound site I visited, I found these trees growing. The problem is they're not that great for building with. And even if they were, you got to get past those thorns to even use it. So why are they planting it? And it wasn't until I read James Mooney.
Can I make a theory?
What?
They're invoking the spirits of whatever they put in the mound into what they're smoking in the memory of the trees.
Well, this could be this particular tree, though, and this is only in one source, and the source isn't academic. It's a psychedelic book by this guy named Keeper Trout, and he bioassayed, which means he tested them on himself, all of these different trees that looked like mimosa, to see if they had DMT in them. And one of the trees he tested was honey locust, Gleditsia triacanthos, what we're talking about. And he notes in there that, yes, it absolutely has DMT in the roots. So I tested it, and it absolutely does have DMT in the roots. And James Mooney, in his essay, Myths of the Cherokee, he talks about how, just like we said a minute ago, there are myths that were used as rites of passage, where they put the worm in their mouth. Well, the same kids, the same two guys that put the worm in their mouth, they have another trial they have to go through where he's put in a pot with the roots of this tree and boiled. Now, I don't know exactly how the ritual would have played out. Probably a test of courage to see if the kid would
Sounds like ayahuasca.
The pot, yeah, you get in the pot at all, but they're boiling those roots. Now, when I was left with the problem of, well, how did they make it orally active? Because you can't just have the DMT, you've got to have the monoamine oxidase inhibitor. Well, when I did some digging, I found out that they have this other thing they do called black drink. that's made from Ilex vomitoria bush, which is a weeping yaupon, a yaupon holly. It's a close cousin of South America's yerba mate, and in fact, it's the only North American source of caffeine. So everybody
I was
thinks
gonna say it sounds like a Yohimbe cousin or something.
it's like that, and everybody
Yeah.
thinks that they're just drinking it for the caffeine content. Well, I read in this book by Sean Rafferty, Native American and Intoxicants of North America, or something like that, about Native American intoxicants. And he mentions how the Ilex vomitoria in the black drink is just the base, that they had all these different secretive ingredients they added to it that changed the way it functioned. Well, the very first French artist that made it to the New World was this man named Lemoyne, and he did a wood engraving of the black drink ritual. And it's a group of natives sitting in a circle, drinking out of these giant shells like they're cups and vomiting. They drink and they vomit. They drink and they vomit. So this
sounds like a good time.
This led the botanists to name that bush Ilex vomitoria. So in any forestry book you read, it tells you that stuff's toxic. It'll make you vomit. I tested it. I drank a shit ton of it, and not once has it made me vomit. So that's wrong. But when you think about ayahuasca, in some regions, ayahuasca is known as la purga, the purge, because it makes you vomit. So I was like, well, what if it's an MAOI? And so I did some digging and found out, sure enough, just like its cousin in South America, it's an MAOI. So if they mix those roots, the boilings of those roots, with the black drink, it would have caused something chemically identical to ayahuasca. That's
and
what
then they would have puked.
And then they would have puked.
Yeah.
And that's what I call my misahuasca hypothesis. I'm pretty sure that's what's going on. And even if it's not, there, which I know it is, to be honest, but there are other plants. The Nicotiana rustica, the form of tobacco they were using, has MAOI in it. And we know they were drinking that. So yeah, it's a complex pharmacopoeia that they have. And this moth and worm are kind of at the center of the whole thing.
That's fascinating. So it's a life cycle of their psychoactive plants that is their entire initiation thing. Is, you know, our society without manhood initiation is really taking a dive in a lot of ways. So that's like the linchpin to the functionality and longevity of a strong tribal society. So we're talking about like something very pinnacle to who and what they are.
Right. Right. And they had, originally only the elite used it, and the elite would use it for different ritual purposes. But they have this belief that when you die, the soul enters the Milky Way, which they call the path of souls, and that leads to the land of the dead. Well, they would do this in the summer solstice, when the north end of the Milky Way arch aligned with certain mounds on these sites. Like at Cahokia, it was Rattlesnake Mound is where it would align with. Well, eventually, just like with the pharaohs in ancient Egypt, only the pharaohs went to the field of rushes. Regular people didn't get to go there. And they would put the instructions on how to get there on the inside of their tombs. That's why they call them the pyramid texts. And the instructions are about just this: how to get on the Milky Way, which they called the Street of Stars. Well, eventually, when tomb raiders got in there and saw that written down, they wrote it down themselves and then started selling that information, and it would get painted on the inside of coffins. And then it became known as the coffin texts. And then eventually it was put on papyri, and those became the books of the dead, Egyptian books of the dead. And then by then, anybody who wanted one could have one.
Yeah.
Similar thing was going on with this. Only the elite knew how to get on the Milky Way, and they would do it on the summer solstice. Well, once this information started being given to other people, this sort of secret society of shamans was formed. They called a medicine society. And they would offer this afterlife thing to people who weren't initiated, who weren't elite, but they would do it on the winter solstice instead and go into the southern branch of the Milky Way, which is in Orion. So they see Orion as what they call the chief's hand, the constellation we recognize as the hunter, they see as a hand. And in the palm of that hand is an eye, kind of like the Hamsa eye from the Middle East. But it's not an eye, it's a portal they call the Oji. And
Yeah, we
once you
were
go
talking
through that,
about this. So I have a question for you. Are there distinct intervals that the soul exits, like 12? I don't know. That'd be a good number. Or is it, if you don't pick the perfect time at the perfect place, you're screwed? Because outer space is
let's say you died, if you died in the fall, they would excarnate your bones, meaning they would scrape the flesh off and they would save your bones in a bundle. And then they would do the ritual for you on the winter solstice. So you could pay to have it done ahead of time, and you had to pay. And here's the thing. So it's knowledge about how to do a real thing when you die. But in this secret society, they were every different stop, every trial along the path of souls, one of which is this serpent entity. They had a different psychedelic brew that they would drink for the ritual initiation. They would dramatize it. And based on what degree you were, you got your shell cup had that carved on it. So some of the shell cups have the giant raptor carved on it, which is the judge at the end of the path. Some of them have the serpent carved on it. Some of them have the other, all kinds of different things carved on it, but they represent the stations on the path of souls. So the initiates were recognized how, just like a Mason is, by what degree they are, by what badge they're wearing. And once they knew them all, then they could serve as a psychopomp, a guide for other dead people who weren't initiated but had paid for it to get them into the afterlife. And it wasn't a sham for them. They really believed that they're guiding this soul into the land of the dead. And they did that by taking the psychedelics sequentially and either dramatically going through it or going through it in a trance, meditatively entering. And what's interesting is the Tucano down in South America, this ayahuasca drinking group, when they were interviewed by an archaeologist, he said, well, they take the ayahuasca and they lay in their hammocks, and the goal is to get on the Milky Way. And they say that the first time you can't do it. The first time you might get as high as the horizon. The second time you might get as high as the moon, but by the third or fourth time you get the hang of it and you can get on the Milky Way. So even in South America, they're taking ayahuasca to get on the Milky Way, the street of stars, what the Egyptians called it. The Mayans called it the White Road.
See what they're talking about, because I've been through this, strangely enough. And I can't imagine the activation process for someone with a cultural mythos from a primitive society. But for me, it very much looked like a control panel. And as I put my will upon this red light underneath the screens that looked sort of like a button, but it wasn't a button, I took off like a rocket. As soon as I got to the horizon line, right above the earth, you kind of just stop and you kind of just float there. If you don't learn how to swim, which is the secret, guys, you use a focus mechanism with your eyes. You grab onto a target and pull yourself toward it in the astral. It's very much the focus mechanism of the eyes, because they are hardwired.
A Westerner that talks about this. He runs an ayahuasca clinic down in Costa Rica, I think. But he's got a video on YouTube called Mrs. Moon's Medicine. And he talks about how he was a womanizer. He was addicted to cocaine. He was an alcoholic. And he had tried everything to try and straighten up, and he couldn't. And then finally, some woman said to him, have you tried ayahuasca? And then she said, oh, never mind. You wouldn't do that anyway. You don't have the balls enough, basically. And he was like, fuck you, challenge accepted. And he got on a plane right then and went down, I believe, in South America and did ayahuasca. And he
Sounds
lay in
like
there.
something you would do. you would absolutely, you would take that challenge in a heartbeat.
Probably in my younger days, I definitely would. But when he gets there and takes the ayahuasca, they put a blindfold on him, and he's laying there thinking, "This is bullshit. Nothing's fucking happening." And the guy leading the ceremony, he says, "Now, when you see something, I want you to put your hand up." And he's laying there, and a few minutes pass, and all of a sudden he sees like a flash of what he thought was a house cat, but then it was gone, and he thought, "Oh, that's just my mind, there's nothing important." So he didn't say anything. And then the next few minutes, he's really seeing a lion, and it's as real as anything else. So he thinks, "Holy shit, I'm seeing something." So he throws his hand up and he says, "Hey, I'm seeing something." And the guy comes over and puts his chair behind the guy's head where he's laying. And he leans over him and he says, "Okay, how many fingers am I holding up?" And the guy says, "What the hell are you talking about? I got a blindfold on. I can't see it." And before he can finish his sentence, he can see through the blindfold, and he sees that he's got 3 fingers holding up. He says, "Oh, you have 3 fingers holding up." He's like, "Okay, I want you to look at the ceiling." And he said, and all of a sudden he could see the ceiling through the blindfold. And the guy says, "Now make the ceiling go away." So he does it. He says, "I don't know how I did it, but the ceiling went away and I was looking at the stars." And he said, "Now pick a star and go to it." And he said, "I picked a star, and all of a sudden I was flying towards this star."
Yeah.
And then he gets out there, and the guy says, "Now find the moon. You're
And
going to
Steve,
look over your
wait,
shoulder to the left, and you'll see the moon." And he looks over his shoulder and to the left, and there's the moon. And he's like, "Holy shit, this guy's done this before. He knows exactly where the fucking moon is." And then he tells him to go to the moon. I'm sure that if he had kept going, he would have gotten on the Milky Way, because that's what their tradition does. First, they get to the horizon, then they get to the moon, then they get to the Milky Way.
but yeah, I like how there's no mucking about. It's like, do this, now this,
Right.
now that, and as the person even considers those things, they happen at the speed of thought, and that's fucking awesome.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And it's exactly what these natives are talking about. And I even found a patent that was filed for in 2005, maybe. These 3 researchers were trying to come up with a medication to make you quit smoking. And they're trying to use MAOIs. And the things they're using in there are tobacco and yerba mate, the same 2 things that show up in the residues of all these shell cups, along with the datura. So they were using these plants as monoamine oxidase inhibitors to activate DMT orally in order to get on the Milky Way. So what they're doing is creating a virtual experience of a real phenomenon. They're creating, they're inducing NDEs, near-death experiences, and out-of-body experiences. But they have total control of it, and they have complete knowledge of how and what to do. It's not just like, "Oh, let's take this and see what happens." It's not experimentation. It's actually.
It was always experimentation with us, but it's interesting because it seems like there's possibly some spiritual guides or helpers or facilitators, because the way you're describing it, the person is kind of on a ride, and it's like, I wonder if the shaman who is helping facilitate the experience, I wonder if he could do it on his own without the cultural. It seems like they're maybe on the shoulders of giants, like ancestral giants that are just like helping them along the way to this, is what it seems like.
They very much believe that the dead, your ancestors, guide you on this stuff. And I do too. I mean, I didn't believe in that kind of thing years ago, but the more I immerse myself in these traditions, especially since being initiated into Palo Mayombe, I mean, I really believe that. And when I say ancestors, I don't just mean our grandparents. I mean, going all the way back to the first man. They had their hands on our backs, guiding us, pushing us, wanting the best for us. You know, who wants the best for you other than your fucking ancestors? It's certainly not the guy that's selling you an eighth of mushrooms. But these entities, these beings, very much want us to obtain this knowledge. They want us to exploit it, and I don't mean that in a bad way. They want us to use it. They want us to master it, and they want us to pass it on and teach other people in the same initiatory context. And that's really, like you said earlier, that's what we've lost. In the indigenous mind, you're not a man until you're accepted as a man by the other men. You're made a man, and that's the problem now. People, adult boys aren't men. They're just overgrown boys running around. But we don't have these rites of passage, and not all rites of passage are torturous, you know, but they are trials. There's this really one great one I heard. It was either Cherokee or Navajo, where the boy who is being passed into manhood, he knows this is coming because every man has done it and they tell him about it. Well, he's taken out in the middle of the forest, and you got to keep in mind, this is a time when tribes did not get along. They would raid each other's villages, steal their women, murder the men. You know, it was a violent situation, and they would put them out here in a forest where other tribes could hunt and where there were wild animals that would just as well eat you as these other tribes members would kill you. And there's a tree stump. They have a tree chopped down, and everybody does it on the same spot. They put you on that tree stump when the sun goes down, and they put a blindfold on you, and they tell you no matter what you hear, no matter what you feel, you sit there. You don't take the blindfold off. You don't move. Even if something comes up and starts eating you, you sit there like a fucking man. Well, the boy is sitting there all night, hearing every little thing, wondering, am I about to die? Is this the end? Well, after he makes it through a night of that torture, that mental trial, when he starts to hear the birds chirping and he sees the sun come up, he's allowed to take the blindfold off and come home. Well, when he takes the blindfold off, he sees that just behind him is his father, who's been there the whole night, watching him, silent, but there to receive him as a man, as an equal. And he returns back to the village with his father as a man. That's more than just sentimental. That's powerful ritual that we are absolutely missing out on as meta-modern Westerners.
Yes.
And by that, they're eligible to get the real wisdom, which begins and ends with these plants. Magic begins and ends with these plants. Magic powders, you know, any kind of magic that was done by this medicine society, this sodality, a secret society of shamans, involved these magical powders. And all these powders were made with these same drugs. I mean, even if they're not ingesting them, they're using them to project things. They're using them to influence the world because they are them. You got to think, what is a plant that doesn't have neurons doing with neurotransmitters in it? You know what I mean? They have no neurons, but they have neurotransmitters in them. And they communicate, especially the mushrooms, communicate with a mycelial network that has just as many, if not more, connections than the human brain. I mean, this illusion of where you end and where space begins, all that's illusory. We're one thing, one fluid thing. And you can accomplish many miracles with these particular plants, not just from eating them. They are magic in themselves.
Yeah. I just did a video on that about it was called Chaos Agency, the Face of the Waters. So basically it's, you know, you can act as an agent of chaos and affect some change, but what you want to do is rise yourself so that you're equal to the celestial order, and then it obeys you, and they're the same thing.
Right. I wouldn't say it obeys you. I would say you get to the point where you're so in tune with it that you only do certain things at the efficacious times, and that unconsciously. It's you become the universe. August Utstavenis, who is one of my idols. He's one of the he died in 2010. He's one of the spirits that, believe it or not, helped me write my book on theurgy, and I believe even gave me the whole concept of it, because it came in a dream from start to finish, the whole book, and I wrote it in 3 months, and the whole time I felt like he was right over my shoulder. But he says at one point, he says, you don't want to be a radical exception. You don't want to be an individual, a radical exception to the rule. You want to fully integrate into the processes of the universe so that you are the universe. You have the power of the universe, not acting for you, but acting with you, because you are in concert with it. What the Neoplatonists called it was, in the Stoics, called it sympatheia. You're in sympathy, meaning like you're an instrument that's in tune with what everything else is playing. Once you've assimilated yourself to the thing, you only have those drives to do certain things at the proper time, when that drive is a reflection of the will of the whole. The drive wouldn't even arise in your body if it were contrary to the will of the thing, you know.
It's very philosophical.
We've gotten a long way from that worm.
I know. I was trying to think, how do you get back to the worm?
But so it's really fascinating, and we talked about this earlier about that worm, even when it becomes a moth, when it goes through its chrysalis process, it still retains those alkaloids in its body as it part of its constituent, and that deters predators from eating it. But it also raises the question of, well, if you eat the moth, does that mean you'll get high on nicotine and tropane alkaloids? Nobody knows. So when we look at these vases that have the moth painted on it, is that an indication that it contained datura, or is it an indication that it contained the juice of like 1,000 of these moths? You know,
fascinating. The other horned worms, when I was looking it up, they use the horn to steady themselves, because you'd think the horn would be like to attack, but that's not what they do. The horn is just for it's flashy. It does a lot of things.
It's so they can stand upright whenever
they can stand upright and look like a snake, and they squish their face in like a pug, I guess, or squish face, and they try to mimic a snake, but that's not what this particular horned worm does. That's what's fascinating about it. It has,
when he becomes a moth, he's called a sphinx moth. The tobacco moth.
Cool fucking name. Cool name, bro. Like what's that from?
It's because when the worm rears its head up, it looks like a sphinx in sitting position.
That's why?
Yep.
Wow.
And when you see the carving and the drawings of this worm as this dragon in the form of the underwater panther, if you look at Graham Hancock's book, America Before, which covers a lot of this same territory I'm talking about, in there, he does a side-by-side comparison of an effigy pipe carved into the underwater panther and puts it right next to the Sphinx. They're fucking identical. Even the way the tail is curled and the length of the tail are identical to one another. And they call this thing a Sphinx moth. I thought, shit, that is because he's putting it side by side with the Sphinx.
Is this what the original Sphinx is possibly referring to?
Who knows? Nobody has said that except for Graham, to my knowledge, that there's a connection there. But when you see the effigy pipe carved into the underwater panther side by side with the Sphinx, it's undeniable. And that knowledge paired with the fact that that moth is called a Sphinx moth because it looks like a Sphinx when it's the great dragon, when it's the worm, that's spooky,
Yeah, there are no coincidences. Is there a like a Native American or any native or primitive thing that you know of that's kind of like Echo, the Earth Coincidence Control Office from John Lilly?
The closest thing to that would be these thunders, the thunderbirds. Hang on, I gotta get this label off my stogie before I smoke this paper. But they control the weather, and they also give inspiration. They can give you ideas, and they are like angels in a way. And like one of the forms of weather magic that these natives would do, these thunders cannot stand these fucking snakes. They call them tie snakes, and they live with Mishapeshu in the underworld, and they come up periodically. Well, if they see one of these snakes, they can't resist coming down and killing it. So if they want it to start raining, remember these things bring rain, they're weather entities. If the natives need rain, they would kill a snake and lay it belly up on the ground with the knowledge that this thunder can't resist it and is going to come down, and when it comes down, rain happens. Well, I was telling this to a friend of mine who Alec, you know Alec. I was telling this to Alec, and
Yeah.
he was fascinated by it and had met some old guys down in Georgia that I think were natives. And he asked them, what about this? Have you heard of this? And he said, I hadn't heard about that, but I can tell you that ever since I was a little boy, if we want it to rain, we kill a snake, hang it on the fence pole, and that'll make it rain.
Oh, Steve told us that. Don't you remember? Yeah, they used to do that when he was a kid, and he said he never understood it. Kill a snake hanging on the fence pole, and rain will come.
These guys said the same thing, and it basically stems from this Native American tradition about how to call the thunders down. Fucking fascinating, man.
That is, yeah.
I hadn't gotten to try it yet, but
I'm gonna have to chew on that
on a snake.
I heard they taste good.
Yeah, I've tried snake before. I didn't kill it and cook it, but somebody else did, and I tried it, and it was snake jerky, and I mean, it didn't taste bad.
You ever eat a worm?
Nope. I hadn't seen one yet, but if you got to plant datura, so if you plant datura or tobacco, those moths show up on their own. Just like if you plant tomatoes, a
Really?
tomato hornworm going to show up on it. So
You think they would be this far north Arkansas?
yeah, they're all around. They're all around the country. Now I have planted Nicotiana rustica, but mine never flowered, and they all flower, but for some reason mine never flowered. So I'm going to try it again, and if it flowers, my thought is, I planted them at the wrong time of the year for them to flower. But if they flower, those moths will come because that's all they have to eat. They can't live on anything else. They can't choose another nightshade. It has to be datura or tobacco. So they go, just like with what was the guy's name? Darwin. When Darwin went to Galapagos Islands and he saw that, I believe it was a datura flower. He saw that flower that had
12 long, yeah.
Long, and he said, well, if this exists, there must be a moth with a 12-inch long proboscis. And lo and behold, there is one. It's like if you build it, they will come.
I don't know if he was alive when they validated that. I think he was dead by the time they actually found that moth with the 12-inch proboscis, but he was fucking right, man.
Yeah, Darwin was brilliant. People
favorite,
try to put him down because they have it in their head that if he's right, then Christianity must be wrong or whatnot. But it's just an indication of of shallow thinking that can't be part of the process. I don't see why creationists can't also accept that evolution is part of the process. It doesn't.
I'm not a creationist, but I'm a creation enthusiast. I'll put it like that.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even rabbis will tell you that Genesis is not literal, but the fundamentalists, everything's literal to them.
Well, darkness being upon the face of the waters, it implies there not being duality yet. So it's like the potential, the spiritual potential of the monad and stability, and then duality, and then everything begins.
In ceremonial magic, there's the saying, demon est deus inversus, which means the demon is the god upside down. And when it says there's a face on the waters, it's basically implying that there's a face on the waters, and that face would be the reflection, like a mirror, of the face of the deity that was causing creation. So when he's the face on the waters is his face, his own reflection.
Well, the pattern, the pattern in the face of the waters is a reflection of the creator. The pattern itself is the thing. That is the source. That's what we're talking. I don't know if it'd be a literal face. Like, everyone takes this stuff so literally, you got to, the image of God is a pattern. It's a standing wave. You could call it a cymatic, harmonic, resonant, whatever. But we're talking about pattern. Hey, Bacchus.
Hey, Uncle Michael.
Hey, what are you doing, Nike?
Again.
He said he found some reishi mushrooms over here on this tree.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, we get tree rishis here, and he knows how to identify basically every mushroom.
Great. That's really great.
Yeah, we'll go get one.
Will I come see?
Yeah, I'll come see. We're about to wrap this up.
Yeah, and I got to go pick up Vivi from school, so.
Well, give her a big hug for me. Mom told me that she got to hear her sing and play her ukulele, and I was jealous. I hadn't got to hear.
She's moved up. She's on guitar now. So
nice.
So she got guitar tablature, and just started playing and singing Scarborough Fair, just like that.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a great song.
She's got your musical ability. She's got your ability with guitar and music, and she's got a good singing voice. So
well, I definitely don't have.
I'm bragging on my daughter on this. All right, it's good talking to you.
Love you, man. Tell everybody else that I love them.
All right, later.